Okay, so really good to be here. As Victoria said, I was part of the group that made the initial application. I didn't do so much of the work. It was other people, but I did a little bit. And so I've been following the program for these years, and I've also been supervising a PhD student funded through the program, Åsa Kalmer. She'll talk about her research tomorrow, dealing with sufficiency. She's also at KTH. So what I will talk about is living sustainably. So what this means today and what it has meant during the last decades, at least from my research perspective. So my background is in urban studies. I'm at the Department of Urban Planning and Environment, and my research has been dealing with notions of eco-friendliness and living sustainably, what that means according to different groups in society, and also the sort of both mainstream media discourse about it, but also how public agencies work with and try to facilitate or steer towards certain notions of sustainable lifestyles and so on. And it struck me when I was thinking of what I should talk about here, that it would be interesting to go back a bit in time and see how the discourse has changed. And I've been sort of following it, I would say, from the 90s and onwards. So I didn't really, I mean, I'm born in the 70s, so I won't say so much about that. But I started doing research on this topic around 99, 2000 something. So what does it mean to live sustainably? And of course the concept of sustainably hasn't been along for that long, but at least, I mean, it became popularized in the early 90s, I would say, in Sweden. I mean, as you know, it was introduced very much through the Brundtland report, but it took off in the early 90s, I would say. Before that, it was rather other concepts that were used. But during the 70s, there was, of course, also this strong environmental movement. And in Sweden, it was in the context very much of anti-sort of nuclear power and woven together with the alternative lifestyles and so many other political struggles. But I mean, if you looked at what would then be perceived as living sustainably, even though that word wasn't used, it was about living close to nature, a lot about self-sufficiency, doing things on your own and organizing things in a local community together with others, and engage in politics through your micro practices in everyday life, but also through changing the system in a sense. In several countries, and also in Sweden, the Green Party was founded in the early 80s. That was very much the part of what the notion at that time was about living green or so. And since then, it's really changed in many ways. So in the 1990s, the focus was very much on recycling. That was the thing to do if you wanted to live environmentally friendly. Some of you Swedes probably recognize this stuff. I don't know how you, coming from other countries, probably the discourse has been a little bit different, but it was very much focused on recycling. And also buying specifically certain organic products like organic milk. In 1991, the biggest dairy producer in Sweden launched its first ever organic milk. When I did my first study on what it means to live sort of eco-friendly was the concept then, it was a common answer was to buy organic milk. It was not to buy organic products in general, but milk and to recycle. That was the two most common things. But also, in a sense, using more efficient, eco-efficient products of different forms. These new smart toilets that would use less water, and new refrigerators and so on. And very much using your consumer power, a little bit less about engaging in politics. And 2000s, of course, I would say there are also parallel discourse. It's not that everything changes like this, but it is a little bit simplified. But in the 2000s, I would say it was very much turn towards, if it was in the 70s and 80s, more focused on sort of eco-villages and living in the countryside, it became urban living was really the idea. How to live environmentally friendly was to live in the city. And not in some suburb, but in the inner city, basically, or in these new eco-districts that were being built. In Sweden, it was Bo 01 in Malmö, former harbor or area just outside the inner city. And in Stockholm, there's Hammarby Sjöstad, a newly developed area. So living in these urban districts was very much perceived as equated with living environmentally friendly, because you'd be less motorized, using less motorized transport, using public transport, or walking, cycling to work. Very much focus on the everyday transport, and use these different energy efficient systems like district heating was being accessible in the big cities. And also now comes more eco products, I would say. So now it's not only about the milk, it's about the other stuff also. Also clothing and of course other types of food and so on. But when I was doing my PhD, it was also very common, the notion I would hear when I interviewed citizens with different backgrounds was that you need to be rich to live eco-friendly, because it costs a lot. It's expensive. Organic products are more expensive, so you need to be rich to live eco-friendly. It was quite a common notion. And also, very common notion, what the Swedes are really good at living sustainably. This is also something that Sweden has been very good at marketing itself as a green country and as the spearheading the change towards more sustainable living and green technology, etc. So that's been perceived within, I would say, within Sweden, but also from abroad. A notion of the Sweden is in the forefront. This is a public-private marketing platform that was used in the 2000s. It's called Symbiocity, Sustainability by Sweden. So it was the government together with Sweco and a number of consultancy firms, and they developed like a marketing package, particularly, and it was called Symbiocity, particularly to market green tech products and services to China, and also to Middle East and Russia. And they used this graph to kind of sell this notion. So we've had continued economic growth, and at the same time managed to get the CO2 emissions down. So basically this was the sales pitch for, if you can get this in China, if we can help you do this with the Swedish technology, basically, and services. So one of my former PhD students, she spent 5 years studying how Sweden sold its products and services to China. But this notion of decoupling, you're probably familiar with this notion, has been questioned. But this was the truth, I would say, in Sweden during a long period of time. That basically we're doing great. There's no problem at all. Maybe they have some problems in some other countries. China is a bit polluted and so on, but Sweden is really doing good, and the rest just needs to follow us, basically, and then we'll solve things. So it was very optimistic. I'd say what you referred to, Victoria, in the beginning, that there is a sense of pessimism, and this early on in the 2000s, it was very, I would say, in the general discourse, very much optimism. That wasn't any problems at all, basically. We have all the technology we need, and we just, we just need to roll it out. But at the same time, there was nothing about, I would say, the size or the volume of the material consumption. There was nothing about flying. There was nothing about, in terms of, if we think about lifestyles here, nothing about size of homes, second homes, or in general, the effects of Swedish consumption abroad. And this was also things that I studied in my PhD that was finished in 2009. I was looking at then also how the public policy for encouraging sustainable lifestyle was being performed, and also how it was measured in statistics and so on. So you had lots of categories and indicators about how often, how you get to work, what kind of transport you use, what kind, if you buy organic products, to what extent, how your home is being heated. But there was nothing, no data on levels of consumption, no data on flying. So it actually, when I started my work, people didn't know that flying was not good for the environment at all, I would say. And that's a quite well-known fact today. And of course, we, in a sense, scientists knew that in the in the 90s as well, but it wasn't being addressed, and nor was the size of material consumption. In 2010, the Swedish government decided to complement the environmental goals with a so-called generational goal, actually saying that our way of living in Sweden should not negatively affect people and species elsewhere to live a good life. So in a sense, there was a geographical responsibility addressed in that goal, but there were no indicators set to it, no following up on it, but actually it was at least addressed. And this is just, I think it's interesting, this was one of the headlines in 2009. When I had from my PhD in the daily paper, it says tight budget in households with a tight budget is basically good for the environment, which was, and I think it's interesting because now it's so, in a sense, self-evident. But at that time it was like, oh really? I thought you needed lots of money to live environmentally friendly. And after that also, statistics has changed. Now if you look at Statistics Sweden, what they measure and follow up, it's not the same at all, same indicators. They also address consumption-based indicators. So I think it's really changed during these years, and there have been lots of different, researchers have been active in this, as so many others, but also environmental movements like there's one called Klimatmålsinitiativet, which is a group of several different civil society organizations and so on that have been pushing for that issues like consumption and flying and so on should be addressed also, and the effects on that we in a rich country as Sweden have on other beyond our borders should be addressed also in politics. Now, I mean, we still don't have any measurable goals in Sweden addressing that, but the city of Gothenburg is the first city ever, from what I know, at least, that actually have set political goals of how to decrease consumption-based emissions. Yeah, but basically, this, I think it's been turned. The idea is not that Sweden is this so fantastic and doing great and we're on the right track. I think if you'd interview today, whatever people in general, some would think so, but a lot of people would think, no, we actually have a quite, we need to do a lot of things and we're not the best in the class. And if you look at WWF's ecological footprint calculations, Sweden is amongst the top polluters in the world per capita. But there's still this notion, of course, that Sweden is good at green tech and so on. But I think the self-image has changed. And I think that I would say also social sciences and humanities, that researchers in this field that have engaged with environmental politics and environmental studies actually have contributed to actually changing what is being studied according to what perspectives and by what measures and so on. So I think there is a contribution there, because before, I mean, the environmental studies, it was controlled in a sense by people from the natural sciences or technology, basically, with some environmental history maybe, but not so much, I would say, social scientists and humanities. Okay, so this in 2012, I think this is the first time, this is the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, that they publish data on consumption-based emissions. So this is what you see here is, and the dark blue is emissions, or here's the light blue is emissions in Sweden. So that part is going down slightly. So in that sense, this graph I showed you, it's correct that the emissions in Sweden, they have gone down. That's fully correct. But what they missed in that graph was to measure the emissions outside of Sweden. So this is emissions outside Swedish boundaries due to Swedish consumption. So our consumption of refrigerators and cars and flying, etc. This is, and now this is being followed up every year. So that, and of course it's only greenhouse gases. You can also look at, of course, other factors. But I think that's something that people didn't have data on before. And this study, I was part of commissioning this study. It's from the Stockholm Environment Institute. And this is 2012. So then there was the 2-degree target. That was what people were talking about at that time. So if you had consumption-based indicators, this is what Sweden, or the average Swede is around 14 ton per capita. So there's really quite a long way to get down to this this level of emissions. And I think this study was also interesting because the notion of, it's Stockholm, Gothenburg, the big cities that is the most environmentally friendly places to live in. But it's, according to this study, Stockholm was where the emissions in general were the highest per capita. Which I think is also interesting. Actually, if you look at the total effects of your total sort of lifestyles. I would argue, and there are other studies also that have shown that's rather living in, say, smaller towns and also connected very much to your level of income that affects how much environmental impact you have. It's not whether you live in Hammarby Sjöstad or not, but and it's not specifically the urban life. Yeah, sure.
I'm just really curious. This large yellow part of the columns.
Mm-hmm.
It says for development, investment, and other.
Yeah.
So administration. Could you say what is that a little bit more?
I would say that this is like public consumption. This would be recreation.
Like hospitals.
Yeah. Schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So I mean, this is difficult for you as an individual to control in a sense. It's part of the tax. Yeah. I didn't have this in English, sorry, but it's the different categories of consumption categories, basically. So you'd see, for instance, that food is quite a big part of transport. Okay. So and also I would say that the something that has become much more well known today is also the so-called rebound effect. That before there was so much focus on how much energy we save through getting these new refrigerators or the more eco-efficient cars, etc. But those gains, so to say, from eco-efficiency is often cancelled out by that we get larger and larger homes, more appliances, more stuff. See what I mean? This is a study done in the EU level. So this is the efficiency gains, so to say, and you see more appliances, large homes. It's not entirely cancelled out, I'd say, but this is something you need to also consider when you talk about eco-efficiency. We don't need. This is a more recent study on. This is again other. It's also yellow in this No, there is public consumption. So this is other. I don't know exactly what this is actually, but this is public, and you have food, heating your home. And flying is also. I mean, it's quite big, given that it's not something we need to do every day, in a sense. So I think, I mean, we have much, in a sense, better data today and know more about what you can actually do as an individual and to live more sustainably. So I would say now, in the 2010s, given that we got much more better, in a sense, data, and also shifting perspectives of what it means to live environmentally friendly. There have been much more a focus on cut down on air travel. That is, if you want to be a good eco citizen today, you cut down on air travel or you stop flying entirely. Eat less red meat, buy secondhand, share things, or at least this was in the early, I would say, 2010s. Also support your local producers and so on. So this is an illustration that I think captures this. That I think in the 90s and early maybe 2000s, so much more because it was focused on buying the right stuff. So turning to organic or more efficient products, but not so much down here, like use what you have. Actually, that's much more often more eco-friendly, but it's not necessarily framed in that way. And I think that has become much more in focus the latter years. that we need to move down in a sense in this hierarchy. It's not enough to only change to better product, but we need to make do with less actually. So today then, it's not only about cutting down on flying. This is some of you perhaps recognize this, but this was like a campaign that started in, I think 3 years ago was the first one, and then it's in its third year. Basically, we're staying on the ground. So there's a group of Swedes starting this. It was spread very much on Facebook, where you'd commit to basically not have a flight-free year. And now it's spread to the UK, this is in Belgium, it's been on the news in several countries and so on. And these different forms of campaigns, and where you also publicly commit to certain things as a way of also encouraging yourself and others, but also as showing, in a sense, that I'm living eco-friendly. A year ago in Sweden there was a lot of debate with the concept of flight shaming. I don't know if you've had this in other places as well. That was a concept being used, and there was also on Instagram an anonymous account that would shame all the influencers that would post pictures on themselves flying. So flying today has really become something more, something you don't want to show to others if you try, at least if you try to live, or you want to be perceived as living more environmentally friendly. But also consumption-free is a concept that's being used more and more. This is also something that Åsa Kalmer has explored in her PhD. She's studied in one of her groups is people having had a consumption-free year, and how they perceive that and why they've done it and so on. And this is a poster from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, Naturskyddsföreningen. So now they are sort of campaigning for have a shop-free month. And before, this is, I would say, having followed this for several years, the last year was the first time ever they, I would say, really addressed, or it was explicitly anti-consumerist. Before it's been, they've been working with shoes, a more eco-friendly product. It's where they've been very much active in handla miljövänligt and eco-labeling and so on. And of course in other areas of politics as well, but not explicitly anti-consumerist. But obviously today they think differently. And also zero waste living, I would say, in general, also been the last few years come up as how you can live without creating waste. So there are these different Instagrammers and bloggers that would have these little jars that would show you during a whole whatever year they'd have only scraps, little things that they couldn't or that was produced that they couldn't whatever compost or so. So that's something that have become more, I would say, not necessarily widespread, but in the discourse about living sustainably. And of course also not, I mean, I would say some years ago it was maybe more like eat less meat, more vegetarian, but now it's also become much more this go vegan. So it's been, in that sense, much more strict, I would say. But then, connecting to what we have been doing in this Mistra Sustainable Consumption Program, we have been mapping during a year. During 2018, we basically mapped, what do people perceive is living or consuming sustainably in the areas of furnishing, food, and vacationing. So that's why we've gathered 800 different examples and clustered these and so on. They're unfortunately in Swedish, these reports. But in that, now I'm coming, how many minutes do I have?
Well, you can go for 15 more minutes.
Okay. And you're free to, interrupt. I will leave some room for discussion also. But in this mapping we did, we clustered different ways or different notions of consuming sustainably. And I won't go through that here, but we also came up with this typology. This is still tentative, so I'm very much open to comments, and I'm working now on an article to develop this typology. Basically, when it comes to consumption, now I'm not talking about living sustainably in a wider sense, but more sustainable consumption. So you can see consumption, you can basically divide it in 3 phases. So it's the buying or the acquisition phase, when you make a decision on what to buy. You have the use phase, how you use a product or share it or take care of it. And you have the phase of possibly being engaged in the production of the product or service, or enabling it in a sense. And traditionally it's been very much focused on this phase, buying the right product. This is what we've been very much taught in a sense. So the traditional, if you just say to somebody on the street, what is consumption, sustainable consumption, we say buy eco-labeled goods. In this case, I have examples from food. So buy eco-labeled meat, for instance, or buy second-hand furniture, something with the lower environmental impact. But it could also be, of course, social factors. So product services entailing better social impact. Buy fair trade coffee, or buy locally made furniture, for instance, support your kind of local community. But also here, in the buying phase, you have the option of not buying. So I think that's come in, and in our gathering of examples, it was much about non-consumption, choices of non-consumption. So skip whatever you were thinking, or reduce the size. So buy less stuff to your home. And then in the use phase, you could see it could be taking care and using the existing. So cook from leftovers, for instance, or care for and maintain the furniture you have. That is, in a sense, in the realm of consumption also. But also how you use something, whether you own it yourself or whether you share it with others. So you can have something that you can also then rent or swap or borrow. You can have a more fluid ownership. That's also a way of consuming more sustainably. Share leftover foods via app. There is this Olio, for instance, a food sharing system. Or renting furniture. That's something that's also being available now. Also, the big companies like IKEA, they are developing models now for having a more subscription-based model of furniture. And then you can wonder, is this really more, eco-friendly, or does it reduce wouldn't necessarily say so. But anyhow, what this mapping is how people perceive and think of living or consuming sustainably. At least the idea could be that you share stuff that you don't need all the time. And then in this phase, there could also be, so not only just buying better whatever food at the big chain store at ICA, for instance, in Sweden. It could be about joining a food cooperative, for instance. So you're together with other actually part of making that store and choosing what farmers to buy from and so on. Or start or join a repair cafe or a wood workshop or something in this sector of furnishing. And different forms of do-it-yourself or do-it-together. So growing food, participating in a community gardening, and so on. So actually thinking about how things are being produced, not just being a passive consumer. So what this typologies we're suggesting with it is that there is a certain move from the informed consumer, in a sense, to being co-producer. I think that is something that you can see today. That this is amongst groups that want to live more sustainably. They also try to engage and change the systems of provisioning. So engage in building kind of alternative infrastructures of provisioning. That could be then, together with others, joining or building a community garden. Or this is the solidaric fridges, for instance, that have appeared in, I think it started in Germany from the beginning, but there are lots of different places where you'd have like public fridges where you can place leftover foods and people that need can take and so on. So different forms of infrastructural systems that enable other forms of consumption. With this said, I think that the concept of conviviality, the way it was used or has been used in the degrowth movement, in terms of not just living well together, but conviviality in the sense of empowerment or being able to be less dependent on big corporations or expert systems. That is something you can see here, that there is an interest in being more capable, more capable citizen rather than this locked-in consumer. Although, of course, I would say this is not a general trend for all. At the same time, we're going in quite different directions. We're becoming more and more dependent on subscriptions, and we cannot even repair our phones ourselves, but we need to replace them when the battery is not working anymore. But in contrast to that, there is very much a strong interest in taking more power back as citizens, being able to repair and make stuff on their own or in communities. I think this is, so given that my background is in urban studies and urban planning, I've also been interested in looking at, so what is the role of cities and public agencies here? So if we think that citizens shouldn't just be passive consumers, so what can cities do to enable other forms of living, in a sense? So this quote is from Julian Agerman, who's in this kind of intersection, environmental justice and urban planning. Building a sharing infrastructure and culture is quite simply one of the most important things cities can do to contribute to a fair and sustainable world. I don't know if I maybe entirely agree, but I think it's something interesting there with infrastructure for sharing rather than infrastructure just for consumption and private ownership. That is something you can, from the public sector, also encourage and facilitate and open up for. And I think that is something we can see today. This is an example from Malmö, where there's an old church, Karoli Park, that was temporarily transformed. It was like an experiment to build sort of consumption-free spaces or public spaces that where you can do things like they had. You could just hang out, but there were also different classes, and there were you could swapping or barter markets and things that could be done by the citizens themselves, but within inside, in a sense, which is important, and not least in the Swedish climate. So you can't do things outdoors all the time. And this is a similar space in Belgium that's being transformed into a free space. And it's, again, supported by the municipality. This was inside Karoli Park. And this is just a number of other examples where the municipality or the public agencies, sometimes together with civil society organizations, build kind of this type of infrastructure. This is the Bike Kitchen in Malmö, which is like a DIY repair workshop that's open to everyone, where you can come and fix your bike and you help others. So it's not only a club with a membership structure, but also certain times it's open for everyone. And these kind of bike kitchens you can find in lots of different cities. But in a sense, they are this kind of sharing infrastructure that Egeman was talking about. Or this Fixoteket, this is in Gothenburg. Again, it's being funded by the municipality, but it's a civil society organization that is doing the content in a sense. But it's basically kind of repair cafes, repair workshops where you can come with stuff and repair electronics, clothes, things. So setting up this kind of infrastructure for citizens. This is from Toronto, public bake ovens. I think it's really interesting about Toronto, and also this is from San Francisco, where the municipality has also set up administrative systems for enabling citizens to set up different forms of kind of sharing infrastructure where you can do things. This is for people being able to make whatever pizzas in the open air. But then if you want to initiate, say, public oven or this parklet, there are certain rules, and this is how you get a permit. But in a sense, opening up the administrative systems for citizens to create their own sharing infrastructure. So I think that was my last slide, and I think this is in the direction that I can see things are going currently, and the cities that wants to be, on the front now when it comes to being perceived as eco or smart. It's very much about also actually having this type of open spaces, non-consumerist spaces, just having these super eco-efficient building structures. It's not enough anymore, I would say. Then you can wonder how genuine is, how much will this kind of Fixotek really change the overall economic systems on? Yeah, maybe not so much, but at least this is what cities are doing today, the ones that want to be at the forefront. Yeah, okay, thank you.